Why do some people take action and others don't? Why is it that sometimes we stand by when we know we should do something? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Kelly Charles Collins. She is a retired employment law attorney. She did a TEDx talk, which was excellent. And we'll put a link later on so you can watch that. She is a coach. She's a founder of Ladies Who Leverage and the CEO of HR Legally Speaking. She has been an adjunct professor at several universities, an international arbitrator, founder of a nonprofit. She's written multiple books as well. One of them, which is Ace Your Workplace Investigations and Conversations Change Things. So today we're actually going to talk about the bystander effect, why it happens, how do we avoid inaction and safely intervene when a crime or abuse is taking place. And I'm really excited to have this conversation because a few months ago, I actually came across a story of a woman in Pennsylvania who was the victim of a crime. She was actually on a subway. And people literally stood by and watched as she was being raped and abused by this person on the subway. And that was just, to me, it was just mind blowing. And of course, it's not the only story. We've heard those stories in the news. And I was just like, why is it that people, and how is it that people can stand by and not do anything and even literally video it on their phone and not take action on it? And so there's some psychology behind it. And so we're going to talk about that today and how do we overcome it. And when I actually reached out and I was like, who knows something about this that can speak to this? Julie Kratz was the one who's actually previously been on this show a number of years ago. And she did an incredible interview with us. And so I would highly recommend going back and checking that out. But she recommended Kelly for this conversation because she is an expert in this area. So Kelly, welcome to Leaders Transformation. We're excited to have you here and have this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation because many people don't. They don't talk about it. They don't do stuff and they don't talk about it.
Yeah, well, and I think some of that is perhaps guilt and shame. Like, oh, I know we should do something, but I don't know how to address it. Or maybe they feel bad. Maybe it also puts us in a position where we actually need to, as is it, recognize that maybe we should have done something when we didn't. And so there's a level of responsibility there. It's like tag you're it. If you have a conversation about it, all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, now the next time that something happens, I need to step up, and that might be scary to do. So I know you've got some tools for us here to help us to do that safely. But let's start off with, what is the bystander effect for those that are not familiar with the term?
So the bystander effect is the phenomenon that when there is a crowd of people, the more people there are, if there's something happening, say there is, a huge fight, or you see, a big accident or something that's happening. And usually it's an emergent situation where there's, something really terrifying or something happening. That the more people that there are, the less likely individuals are to react. Now, that seems weird because we always hear about, there's strength in numbers. But when it comes to the bystander effect, it's actually the opposite. Because as we see a crowd and we see more people out there, we're looking at like, oh, okay, they're going to do something. Oh, they'll do something about it. Oh, that person's better qualified to get involved. Oh, I'm not going to get involved. And so when we think about the bystander effect and people being bystanders, it's somebody who is just, there, who does not intervene in any way, who's like an onlooker. Think of it as an onlooker. And, you brought up something about why people don't do it. And, there are reasons around that, so we can get into that more deeply, but that's really what it is. Just thinking about being in a space. It could be a workplace, it could be on the street, it could be a bar, it could be in your church, it could be anywhere, and seeing that something is happening and not taking any action. That's being a bystander.
Yeah, I think about it even on a larger scale. How many times we heard somebody say, somebody should do something about that?
Yes.
And it's like, hey, you saw it. Maybe that's the thing that you need to do something about. And so, I think we have a tendency to expect and kind of defer it on someone else. and hope that somebody else handles it, because recognizing that there are some risks involved with it, and sometimes we don't want to put ourselves out there. So let's talk about when you mentioned, so I know you have a story yourself and how you discovered this and the impact of that. You talk about your son.
Yeah. So, a couple of things happened in terms of, my experience around bystander effect. One was me actually being a bystander, and the other was watching someone intervene to help my son. So I'll tell you about the first. So the first was that I had a friend who had, when I was in college, who told me, in law school, told me that she was being abused, but she did not want me to say anything about it. She asked me to be quiet. And normally that's not who I am. Like, I would not just be like, oh, okay, I'm not going to say anything about it. But she really asked me to keep quiet about that. And I did. And that has bothered me for years, because I know that my silence could have put, her in more jeopardy. I think sometimes people also think, though, in those types of domestic violence situations, that you speaking up could also put them in jeopardy. So you kind of feel like you're in this catch-22. There's an ambiguity around what your role really should be. But that impacted me and still impacts me, these many years. On the flip side, my son was at a restaurant with a couple of his friends, and after paying their bill, they were asked to pay again, because I guess the waitress had left and she didn't, check them out properly, whatever it was. So there was a discussion. The off-duty officer came in. My son called me, and because my son said to him, I'm going to call my lawyer, right? His mom. So he decided to call me. This is like, 1:00 in the morning. And I'm like, okay, just, if you all have to pay it again, just pay it and leave. Well, when he got off the phone, that officer got really upset and like put him in a headlock and dragged him out of the restaurant and body slammed him. And so, my son's friends called, because now they were arresting him. And my son's friends called and said, this is what's happening. So I had to jump up, get dressed and get fully dressed, right? I got dressed in a suit and I did everything, which some people may think is strange, but because I'm a mother of a Black son, I was like, I have to show up differently. And so I went there in my suit and was talking to him, trying to talk to the police officer and explaining, what's going on. Well, while I was standing there, a young woman comes flying up behind me, and she was like, he did nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong. And so she's talking to the police officer, and she's telling the police officer, why did you do that to him? He did nothing wrong. You shouldn't have done that. The police officer then begins cursing at her. Like, I mean, it was so vile, the way in which he was speaking to her and the curse words that he was using. And I said, why are you doing that? I said, I just explained to you that I'm an officer of the court. Why are you acting like this? And his supervisors are around. And I mean, and she would not relent. Like, she just did not care. She wanted to stand up for him. And so lots of other stuff happened that night with, with that cop. And, it was really devastating to watch. And for her, I had to say, I've got this. You'll be, it'll be okay. We reported everything to internal affairs, and then they contacted her, and she still, spoke up for him. And so eventually, we had video and everything, and they had to drop the case against him. But, he went through that traumatic situation. But this young woman who was being physically threatened by this officer, right? Not just verbally assaulted, like physically threatened by her, by the officer. She just stood up for him, right? So she put all of her fear aside. She didn't know my son from a can of paint, nothing. And that just let me know that there's no reason that we should not stand up for people, and that there's always room to do something, right? And for her, it was leveraging her voice and using her voice to help someone that she didn't know, but she knew it was the right thing to do.
Wow. Well, you think about how many opportunities we have to stand up with our voice and to speak out. And sometimes some people do, some people don't. So let's talk more in depth about what makes the difference. Why do some say something or do something and others not?
Yeah. So they've done lots of, studies and done things to figure out why it is that some people act and others don't. And what they found is that there are really 4 reasons why that happens. One is fear, right? We know that immediately. We're afraid of the situation. We don't know if we're going to get hurt, right? And so we don't want to get involved. And sometimes we're afraid that maybe we would even get killed. Right. So in this situation, this young woman, I mean, she could have been physically hurt by this officer. She could have, ended up in jail, whatever, but she put aside her fear. Well, most times we don't. We let that fear overtake us and we don't get involved. And that's natural. We're thinking about self-preservation. So that's one reason we don't get involved. The second is ambiguity. We're not really sure, right? Is this a situation that needs me, right, to intervene? So we may see somebody, in a conversation that seems loud and seems like an argument, but you're not really sure, or you see something that you think in the workplace might be harassment, but again, you're not really sure. And so you feel that me getting involved may escalate the situation, may cause it to be worse. So, it's too ambiguous for us to get involved. A third reason is affinity, whether or not we have a connection, some type of connection. It might be a connection of gender. It might be a connection of race. It might be a connection of religion. It might be just for you a human connection, but whatever that is. But if we don't have that affinity to someone, right? So we see that a lot, right? We've seen that, on news stories where, if somebody doesn't look like you, or somebody's not from the same neighborhood, or whatever it is, somebody is just different, then we have no connection or no affinity to that person. And so we're not going to get involved. And then the fourth is what they call diffusion of responsibility. That person will take care of it, right? Them over there, they've got this. I'm going to go about my business, because there were lots of other people in the situation with my son. The restaurant was packed. There were many other people who saw what happened and they didn't get involved, right? Okay, she's got that. She's going over there, to say what she had to say. And we do that a lot. And that's why when they talk about having a group of people and an individual doesn't really step up, it's because we're looking around to see who can we put the responsibility off on to have them speak.
Yeah, and it's easy to see something on social media, like all of us watched, of course, George Floyd, and I told you this when we were talking prior to this interview. I was saying, like, why doesn't anybody do something? Like, that was in my brain. I was just like, oh my gosh. Right now, of course, part of that is because we know the outcome.
Yeah.
And I think if we knew the outcome of situations, then we might think differently. It's easier to say, hey, this is, how it ends, and I wouldn't want that. But so talk a little bit about maybe even that scenario, because I know you said there was different factors involved there in terms of why some people wouldn't have made took an action where maybe somebody like myself might have not had that same concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was interesting because you and I had that conversation and you were saying, like, why didn't they, go further or intervene? And what I was explaining to you is that the people who are around, so think about the young Black woman who actually did the recording, right? That doesn't make her a bystander, because that's part of when being part of intervention, right, might be to record the situation. But you're thinking about the people around and their relationship to the police officers, right? So when we're talking about affinity, when we're talking about fear for our life, right, you have to take all of those things into account. And so as Black people and brown people, we know not to get involved, right? We know not to intervene in police situations for fear that it's not going to go well. So it wouldn't have only been Mr. Floyd who was murdered, but maybe somebody else who tried to intervene. And then they would say, well, the reason that happened is because you got in police officers' business. And so you have to look at it from that perspective. As a white woman, if you had intervened or if you had gone in, they probably would not have done anything to you. So I can't remember if the the person who was a paramedic, if that person, I think that person was not a person of color and was able to get close enough to the officers to say, you know, take his pulse, whatever. Had that been a Black person, it probably would not have gone so calmly, right? Because of the interactions that happen. And so when we're talking about what is going through our mind and the decisions we're making as to whether or not we're going to intervene, your own personal experience or your experience from the standpoint of your race, your ethnicity, your religion do come into play. And so there is a different experience. And when you see those things, also, you know, you see those things, you don't want to get involved or get involved in a physical way. And there's also the matter of trauma, right? And knowing that these are the things that happen all the time, that we've been telling people over and over that these things are happening. And to now be, especially for that young woman, I think she was 18 years old, to have to be the one to record this story, the trauma of that, of living it out, like in full technicolor, is just a lot. So, you know, as you're talking about why people do what they do and don't do what they don't do, it has to do with our entire life experiences. And, you know, when I'm talking about and why I'm saying this too, is if you think about, there was, I forget where the moms were. It was some state they were in, and they created a whole line, right? It was white women, right, who created this entire line and were going, you know, trying to block the police. And what I know about that situation, right, just from, you know, experience in life, is that there is no way that in that situation, that on TV, that those police officers would do anything to those white women. Had they been Black women, there would not have been the same, I would not have had the same certainty that something would not have happened to them, because this country reveres white women, right? We have to just be very real about that. And the pain and the suffering of white women, they do not have that same reverence for Black women. And so they knew that they had a level of power that they could intervene in that way and not put themselves in danger.
Well, and that's a whole other podcast and series of podcasts in terms of why that is and how wrong that is. And I love what you said there at the end, is that we can then use that and recognize the opportunity that we have to intervene and use our privilege, if you will, to use what we have, whatever that is, whether it is a camera or whether it is our voice or whether it is the color of our skin, to say, no, that's not right. And that's so important. Let's talk about the 4 C's for how we can intervene safely. We've talked about some of them here, but even just kind of listing them out so that we can talk about them and really have, my goal with this conversation is that people listening, and myself, of course, learning as well, and saying, what can I do when I see something happening? I can go through this process in my head and it's clear and it's kind of like imprinted on there that these are the things that I can do.
Absolutely. And the thing to understand too is that most people want to intervene. It's not that people don't want to help. It's not that people don't want to, you know, basically save the day. They just don't know how to do that. And so, you know, when I was, you know, working through this and looking at what happens with my son, I came up with what I call the 4 C's for safe intervention. Because the goal must always be to de-escalate the situation. You never want to escalate it. So if you think that anything that you're going to do is going to escalate the situation, then just do nothing, right? You know, I always say that there's always room for something to do, but if you really feel that you're going to escalate the situation, then it's probably better not to intervene. So the 4 C's are, first, connect. And so when I'm talking about connecting, I'm talking about making eye contact. That could be eye contact with the person who is, we'll just say victim, right? Or the person who is being attacked, or the person who's being harassed, bullied, whatever it is, the person who is having something done to them. You want to make eye contact with that person so that they understand that there is someone there with them, right? Because sometimes that is just what people need to be able to maybe fight back or to just steel themselves to what's happening. So connect with them, make eye contact. Second person to connect with is the perpetrator, whoever's doing the thing, right, that should not be done, so that they know that they're seen. Because sometimes that again will have them just stop, because they know that they're not doing this in a silo, that somebody has seen them, somebody could report, somebody, could come, towards them and get them, whatever it is. So that may help to stop the situation. And again, these are ways that for people who don't want to get physically involved, it's a way for them to do it. The other people, the other persons who you should connect with are the people around you. So when we have these crowds where it's like, no, you do it, no, you do it, no, you do it. It's like, no, we're going to do this, right? Help me enroll people in it, so that, you may be telling somebody to do something, but connect with other people so that there is this meeting of the minds around what is happening. The second C is to create a distraction. That distraction could be anything. It could be yelling stop. It could be, they tell you yell fire. It could be, asking a random question, right? Sometimes you see, like if you're in a workplace or you're somewhere and you see that somebody is having a conversation and maybe somebody feels uncomfortable, there's some kind of touching, just go up and ask a random question. Why do that? Because it just breaks whatever is happening, right? So now the people have to be like, wait, what? Why'd you ask me that? Like that has nothing to do with anything. That may give that person who's being subjected just enough time to get away, right? Just enough space to move. But creating a distraction may also mean that you have to physically intervene. It may mean that you need to remove people, right? So the distraction is about making sure that something is breaking up that situation. The third is to call for help. Calling for help could be calling for help from the people who are around you. Could be calling 911, could be calling a teacher if you're in school. It could be calling, HR, anything. Just enrolling people into helping so that there is somebody else, a third party, right, who is helping to, again, de-escalate the situation, because that's always the goal. And then the fourth is to capture the incident. And this is really important in our social media, right, world, where everything is captured. But oftentimes what we see is that these things are captured for entertainment as opposed to evidence. And when you are capturing, just like the young woman who was capturing what was happening with George Floyd, she captured that for evidence. She wasn't capturing it so that it could just be on social media and people could be like and share and comment, which is what we do often, right? But you want to make sure that you're capturing it. So you want to make sure that you're capturing faces and maybe landmarks or dates or anything. And capturing is not just a cell phone. It could be that you have a text message. It could be there was a voicemail. It could be that you need to be writing down notes, right? Oh, this is happening at this time of day, and these are the people who are around, right? Whatever it is that you can then use to either help the person later time or for you to go report it at some time, but you want to be documenting what is happening. So there are many ways to intervene without physically intervening, but that will help to de-escalate the situation, or once it's over, to help to make sure that the persons who are involved are held accountable.
At first, when we talk about connection, I think about, obviously they didn't make connection with the hijackers, but in 9/11, where there was the, I forget his name, but he rallied the people.
Yep, let's roll.
Yeah, exactly. The famous line, "Let's roll," and how there were people there on the plane that were actually, having communication, whatever communication they could have to document what was happening. Just so powerful. And then you talk about this pattern interrupt is what you're talking about, is interrupting the pattern and how powerful that is. And as a coach, I use that all the time, or interrupting the flow, and how you can use that. It's just, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And, I think people don't think, I think sometimes people think in these situations, I always say this, that we think that we have to be the hero to save the day. But I always say, just think about the small thing that you can do, a pattern interrupt, right? And think about how you can be a hero every day. There are things that we are comfortable and willing to do, and there are things that we are not willing to do. And so you just need to figure out what those things are and do those things, right? Nobody says that you have to be the person that takes down, the person that's wielding the knife or whatever, but do your part to be able to make sure that you weren't just watching and later on saying, man, I was there and I wish I had done something, or I wish I had said something.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that, maybe even just I'm thinking about even from a practical step by step is that if we aren't willing to do the things in the small situations, when the big situation comes along, we're going to be probably less likely to do something there. So maybe it's intervening on those little bit, less risky. There's maybe not a situation where somebody has a knife or a gun or something like that, but we're doing them in the smaller spaces. If we don't stand up for the people at work, in the smaller things, then when the bigger things come along, then we're not going to be equipped. And we also now have our own pattern of behavior and how we handle situations like that. So that's really good. Now, talk about social media. You mentioned about entertainment. I know people don't do things intentionally to like we talked about, not to harm people. And yet at the same time, where does this come from, this idea of like entertainment? How is it possible that that this could be even considered remotely entertainment? The message, the story I was telling about in the beginning in Pennsylvania, and now they're actually going find all those people who were there and recording it and making them accountable for being there and not doing anything. So, but where does that come from?
I mean, it just comes from social media, right? So the social media landscape is all about likes and comments, right? And followers. And so, the more provocative you can be, the more, the more out there you can be. Those are the types of things that garner people's attention and want people to like follow and like. And it's a thing of being able to observe something and kind of, it's almost like voyeurism, right? To observe it, to feel like you have no responsibility for it because you weren't there. And look, I'm just sharing it. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sharing it, right? But what could be so bad? I wasn't there. I couldn't have done anything. And so I just think it is just the nature of social media that it's very visual. We like the videos. We like, whatever is exciting. And to see something like that, right? As crazy as this may seem, for some people, that's just exciting. It's adrenaline and they're liking and they're sharing. There was I talk about in my TEDx, a young girl who watched her friend being raped. And what she did was to put it on social media. She didn't call for help. A friend who was watching was the one who ended up calling for help. Now, this young woman is right there with her friend and she is recording it. So there is just this, there is this thing about, being liked and, being followed and being an influencer that causes people to maybe act in a way that they wouldn't normally act, right? But because of the situation, the environment, what they're seeking and searching out, right, in the world, that something like that would, for them, is like, oh, just put it on here, I'm just sharing it from whoever, or I recorded it and I'm just letting you see it, right? So I think it's that. I don't think that people are innately evil, but again, going back to, well, do I have an affinity to this person, to this situation? You can remove yourself from it. And so it's just like, I'm watching a movie, so I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah. And I think we're desensitized, even our movies, we see a lot of killing, we see a lot of things happening, and we watch it. We watch it on TV. We're passively watching it as bystanders, in a sense, watching it on TV and going, oh, wow, that's cool. Wonder how that goes,
Right.
and so we're desensitized to this. And I think there's another piece to this, which is the self-interest is, are we focused on ourselves and what's of interest? Like, oh, I'm going to get so many likes for this
Yeah, right.
versus who cares about
Yeah.
those things and who cares about how my own safety. If this person's safety is at risk, then isn't that more important right now than my own safety? So there's a lot to that, of course, and
Yeah.
just in the way we show up in society.
Yeah.
Again, another whole podcast right there.
Yeah.
I
I
do
mean,
want to.
in the podcast, I say likes don't save lives, because it is that thing. It is that what have we attached importance to? And
Yes.
it's not life. It's not human life. It's not humanity. We have moved so far away from that to, like you said, just being desensitized and looking at, well, I need this many likes. I need to be on Reels so that I can get this many all the things that just keep being put out there for us to like just be dehumanized in some way and be desensitized to human suffering and to, the person next to you, or the person that you're watching that you don't know them, but you realize that they're suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a challenge for all of us to stop and check in and say, hey, get present with ourselves, saying, hey, what's going on and what is the most important thing in this moment. I do want to, before we wrap up, talk about, because you mentioned it even in your own experiences, talking about the people that actually have something going on. And this happens a lot with domestic violence or even in the workplace, where they say, yeah, this is happening to me, but I don't want you to say anything. At what point do you, respect their choices because it's their life and it's their situation, and or decide that's fine for you to say that, but of course there's different motives there for them and fear or whatever, and actually saying, no, I've got to do something about this, whether they want me to or not. I'm going to step in for them. So talk a little bit about how we know what to do.
I think in those situations, you have to take into account what is the more likely outcome on their part, right? So if you're talking about somebody who's in a domestic violence situation, and that my values, my morals say I need to say something. However, I know she's, he or she is with crazy person, and that person, if they even get a hint that somebody's going to say something, that person can end up dead, right? You might want to figure out a different way, figure out some way to intervene. But if they're saying, don't say anything, sometimes you may have to respect that. It's hard though, because that it's like a decision. Do I say something and possibly this person ends up really, really harmed or dead? Do I not say something and know that they're still going to be abused? Right. So for you, I think whatever your moral compass is, and, explaining to that person and saying, here's what I'm feeling, and I don't want to be responsible for knowing that I knew this and didn't do anything. I can't live with that. Right. So I think being honest with that person. And the other situation where this comes up too, though, is when I was saying call for help. There are situations where that call for help could be more detrimental. For example, if we're talking about Black or brown people, if we're talking about somebody who may have an immigration status that could get them in trouble or deported or something, right? And so if you see something like that, or you see somebody who, is in harm's way, and you say to them, do you want me to call for help? Who do you want me to call, right? I want to help you. Who do you want me to call? Do you want me to call the police? And somebody may say to you, no, don't call the police, but call my mom. Don't call the police, but call this person, right? Because they may fear that if there's police intervention, that whatever is happening is going to be worse than what, if you call. So in some of those situations you can ask, but I think you have to let your morals and values guide you. And I think that's the thing that has stuck with me about why it bothered me that I didn't say anything, because my morals and values say you speak up.
Yeah. Yeah. And even how can I help? And think through. And I think that just speaks to the importance of being clear in mind. If we're being triggered in that situation, then we're reacting too. But if we can calm ourselves down and think clearly and say, like, who can I call or how can I help,
Yeah.
then we can have a more intelligent response as opposed to simply reacting, and sometimes even reacting out of our own, like, I want to feel like the hero, or I want to do something because I'm a control freak,
Right.
by nature, and I
Yeah.
just want to do something. This is wrong, and that person shouldn't be doing that to those, to them. So I think it comes back to that motive and priorities and all of that. So this has been really good, Kelly. Thank you. I know this is a big
Welcome.
topic. I know you have a lot of material on it. Where do people find you and find out more information on this?
Well, they can find me at kellycharlescollins.com. That's my website. So all my information is there if you want to contact me there. And I'm also Kelly Charles Collins on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And we'll make sure also in the show notes that your TEDx talk is there, and you have the different books that are available, of course, on your website, so that people can learn more about it. So I encourage everyone who's listening and or watching to go check out what she's doing. She's also doing some awesome things in the area of ladieswholeverage.com, and she's got a podcast as well. And you can tell that she's dynamic, so her podcast is going to be good. So I would encourage you just check out all that she's doing, and follow her, and connect. If you need some support in the areas of her specialty, then connect with her, and move things forward. So again, Kelly, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation. It's an important one. And it's something that just not just in the workplace, you can see how this just goes across our entire lives, and really being able to leverage those 4 C's so that we aren't bystanders.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This show is all about transformation, and it's about leaders transforming their community, transforming their respective arena. And this is a way that we can create transformation in situations. And by doing that, I talk about our tagline, which is creating a better world for everyone. We can do that. And it's one interaction, one decision at a time. And so I believe that leaders of transformation take action. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, wow, this is amazing, and what can I do to, the next step? Well, you might want to write down those 4 things that Kelly's talked about, the 4 C's, and start to imprint them and memorize them, just like you would anything else, that when you're in those moments, you're not going back and like, what was that podcast? What did she say? You want to be able to have those things in the forefront of your mind so that you can think clearly and respond in a way that is going to support and serve that situation well. Maybe if it's something that someone who is having a situation in the workplace or at home or whatever the case is, and maybe it's even sharing this podcast with them so that they can hear it for themselves and start to even ask themselves, like, what can I do in my own situation? So there's a lot of potential here. And I would encourage you to utilize this for what it was designed to do, is to help people to get off the sidelines and take action so you can be a leader of transformation, truly. Every situation, just one situation at a time. So I encourage you that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. You can find us and comment and send us messages there, and let us know how this has impacted you or how we can support you along the way. You, of course, can follow us on social as well. And stay tuned, because next week we're going to have another amazing guest on this show, and we'd love for you to join us. Until then, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.